I saw him from across the parking lot, hunched over near the entrance of the Whole Foods on Columbus Avenue. It was a Thursday evening in late October, around 6:30, and the rain had just started coming down in that cold, steady way that makes everything look gray and miserable. I'd just left my office after closing a $4.2 million deal on a commercial property in Midtown, and honestly, all I wanted was to pick up the Scottish salmon I like and go home to a hot bath and a glass of wine. But something made me look twice at the figure by the door. Maybe it was the way his shoulders curved inward, like he was trying to make himself smaller. Maybe it was the ratty cardboard sign propped against his knee. I couldn't read it from where I was, but I didn't need to. I've lived in Manhattan long enough to recognize someone asking for money. I almost kept walking. God help me, I almost walked right past my own son. It was the shoes that stopped me. Brown Oxford dress shoes, good leather, the kind that cost $300 at Bloomingdale's. I knew those shoes because I'd bought them for his 32nd birthday 8 months ago. He'd hugged me so tight that day, said they were exactly what he needed for work. I remembered thinking how thin he felt in my arms, how I should have him over for dinner more often, make sure he was eating properly. My stomach dropped so fast I felt dizzy. I walked closer, my heels clicking on the wet pavement, and he must have heard me coming because he looked up. Our eyes met. I watched recognition dawn on his face, followed immediately by pure shame. His face crumpled like a child's. "Mom," he said, and his voice broke on that one word. Marcus. My son Marcus was sitting on the ground outside a grocery store with a paper cup in his hand, begging for change. I couldn't process it. My brain literally could not make sense of what I was seeing. This was the boy I'd raised, the man I'd given everything to. The son I'd bought a $450,000 apartment for as a wedding present 2 years ago. And he was here, looking like he hadn't showered in days, wearing clothes that were dirty and wrinkled, with that haunted look in his eyes that I recognized from the mirror after his father died 12 years ago. "Get up," I said, and my voice came out harder than I meant it to. He flinched. I softened immediately. "Please, sweetheart, get up. Come with me." He started crying then, right there on the sidewalk, these horrible gasping sobs that made people turn and stare. I didn't care. I bent down, took his arm, and helped him to his feet. He was lighter than he should be. I could feel it. How much weight had he lost? "Inside," I said. "We're going inside." I guided him through the automatic doors into the bright, warm store. The sudden light made me see him more clearly, and it was worse than I thought. His hair was greasy and too long. He had a patchy beard that looked like he'd been trying to grow it to hide his face. His jacket, the nice wool coat I'd given him last Christmas, had a stain on the front and a tear in the sleeve. We went to the small cafe area near the back of the store. I sat him down at one of those little round tables, and I stood there for a moment, just looking at him, trying to understand. A woman at the next table was staring at us with that mixture of pity and disgust that people have when they see someone who looks homeless. I gave her the coldest look I have in my arsenal, the one I use on men who try to undercut me in negotiations. She looked away fast. "Wait here," I told Marcus. "Don't move." I went to the counter and ordered 2 large coffees and 2 of those pre-made sandwiches. The barista, a young girl with purple hair, gave me a sympathetic smile when I paid. I didn't want her sympathy. I wanted answers. When I came back, Marcus had his head in his hands. I set the food and coffee in front of him and sat down across the table. For a moment, I just watched him. He didn't touch the sandwich. He was shaking. "Marcus," I said quietly, "look at me." He raised his head slowly. His eyes were red and swollen. When was the last time I'd seen my son cry? Maybe at Richard's funeral, when he was 20 years old and trying so hard to be strong for me. "Eat something first," I said. "Then you're going to tell me what happened." He picked up the sandwich with trembling hands and took a bite, then another. He ate like someone who hadn't seen food in days, and I felt something crack open in my chest. How long had he been like this? How long had my son been starving while I sat in my Upper East Side apartment, completely unaware? When he'd finished the sandwich and half the coffee, I leaned forward and asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I recognized those shoes. Where is the apartment I gave you? The silence stretched between us. He stared down at his coffee cup like it held all the answers to the universe. I waited. I'm good at waiting. 23 years of business negotiations taught me that silence is often the most powerful tool you have. Finally, he looked up at me, and what I saw in his eyes made my blood run cold. It wasn't just shame anymore. It was fear. Deep, paralyzing fear. "Mom," he whispered, "I need to tell you something." "What do you mean they took it?" "They forged documents," he said, and the words started coming faster now, like a dam breaking. 3 months ago, Sienna said we needed to put the apartment in both our names for some financial thing, something about taxes or a loan. I don't even remember now. She had papers, official-looking papers. I signed them because she's my wife, Mom. I trusted her. I thought, married couples share everything, right? I kept my face neutral, but inside I was already putting pieces together. What happened then? 2 weeks later, her mother showed up, Marlene. She had more papers, said they were just updates to the registration, something to do with the city records. I signed those too. He laughed bitterly. I didn't even read them. How stupid is that? I just signed whatever they put in front of me. And then? A month ago, I came home from work. The locks were changed. All my stuff was in garbage bags on the sidewalk. Sienna opened a window on the 3rd floor and screamed down at me that the marriage was over, that I was a failure, and that the apartment was sold. She said I should thank her for leaving my things outside instead of just throwing them away. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Sold? To whom? I don't know. Some international buyer, that's all she said. When I tried to go to the police, they showed me the paperwork. It looked legitimate, like I'd sold the apartment myself. The money went to some offshore account. $700,000, Mom. It's worth that much now because of the market. And it's all gone. $700,000. The apartment had appreciated in value since I'd bought it. Of course it had. I'd chosen the location specifically for its investment potential. But that didn't matter now. Where have you been staying? I asked, though I thought I already knew the answer. Shelters when I can get in. Sometimes I sleep in the subway. Sometimes I just walk around all night because it's safer than sleeping on the street. He laughed again, that awful bitter sound. You know what's funny? I kept thinking you'd call. I kept thinking, any day now, Mom's going to call and I can tell her what happened, and she'll fix it. Because you fix everything. But you didn't call, and I was too ashamed to call you, and then days turned into weeks, and I couldn't. I couldn't face you and admit what I'd let happen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him and shake him and ask him why. Why hadn't he come to me immediately? But I knew why, because I'd taught him to be independent. I'd taught him that asking for help was weakness. I'd been so busy building my empire, showing him what success looked like, that I'd forgotten to teach him it was okay to fall down. More than that, I'd made him feel like he couldn't come to me with his problems because I was always so damn capable, always had everything under control. I tried to contest it, he continued. I went to 3 different lawyers. They all said the same thing. The documents are perfect. There's no proof I didn't sell it willingly. My signature is on everything. And Sienna's gone. The phone number I had for her doesn't work. The apartment in Williamsburg where her mother used to live is empty. They disappeared with the money. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was rough and dirty, the nails bitten down to nothing. This was the hand I'd held when he took his first steps, the hand that had gripped mine so tight at his father's funeral, the hand that had signed away everything I'd given him because he'd been manipulated by a woman I'd never trusted. Marcus, I said, and I made my voice as calm and steady as I could manage. Look at me. He met my eyes. I'm going to fix this, I said. I'm going to fix all of it. But first, you're coming home with me. You're going to take a hot shower, put on clean clothes, sleep in a real bed. Tomorrow we start dealing with this. Together. Mom, you don't understand. They have everything. The paperwork is perfect. The lawyers said— I don't care what the lawyers said, I interrupted. Those lawyers don't know me. They don't know what I'm capable of when someone hurts my family. I squeezed his hand harder. Sienna and her mother made a very big mistake. They thought you were alone. They thought they could do this and get away with it because you wouldn't fight back, but you're not alone. You have never been alone. Something changed in his face then. Hope, maybe. Or just relief that he didn't have to carry this burden by himself anymore. We left the Whole Foods together, and I flagged down a cab. Marcus slid into the back seat, and I gave the driver my address on East 71st Street. As we drove through the rain-soaked streets of Manhattan, I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was staring out the window like he couldn't quite believe this was happening. I pulled out my phone and typed a quick text to Richard Chen, my attorney. I've known Richard for 15 years, ever since he helped me acquire my first major commercial property. He's brilliant, discreet, and most importantly, he's loyal. The text was simple. Emergency. Need to see you first thing tomorrow morning. Client meeting, high priority. His response came back in less than a minute. 8 a.m., my office. I'll clear my schedule. Marcus noticed me texting. Who's that? My lawyer, I said. One of the best in the city. He's going to help us. Mom, I told you the lawyers I saw said there's nothing. Those weren't the right lawyers, I said firmly. Richard is different. Trust me. The cab pulled up in front of my building, a beautiful pre-war on the Upper East Side that I'd bought outright 10 years ago. The doorman, James, opened the door for us, and his eyebrows went up slightly when he saw Marcus, but he was too professional to say anything. Good evening, Ms. Westwood, he said, as courteous as always. Evening, James, I replied, guiding Marcus toward the elevator. We rode up to the 12th floor in silence. When we got to my apartment, I unlocked the door and led him inside. He stood in the entryway like he'd never been here before, looking lost and overwhelmed. Bathroom is the same place it's always been, I said gently. Second door on the right. There are clean towels in the linen closet. Take as long as you need. I'll find you some clothes. He nodded and shuffled down the hallway. A moment later, I heard the shower start. I went to my bedroom and pulled out some of Richard's old clothes from the back of my closet. My husband had been dead for 12 years, but I'd never been able to get rid of everything. I'd donated most of it, but I'd kept a few comfortable things, sweatpants and t-shirts, items that still somehow carried a trace of him even after all this time. I laid them out on the guest bed. Then I went to my kitchen and made tea, because that's what you do when you don't know what else to do. I stood at my kitchen window, looking out at the glittering lights of Manhattan, and let myself feel the full weight of what had happened. My son had been living on the streets for 3 weeks. 3 weeks, while I'd been closing deals and attending charity galas and living my perfectly ordered life. While I'd been too proud and too distant to pick up the phone and just check in, just ask how he was doing. The shower ran for almost 40 minutes. When Marcus finally emerged, wearing his father's old clothes, his hair clean and combed back from his face, he looked like my son again. Thinner, more haunted, but recognizably mine. Better? I asked. Yeah, he said quietly. Thank you. Sit down, I said, gesturing to the couch. We need to talk about exactly what happened. Every detail you can remember. He sat, and for the next 2 hours, he told me everything. How he'd met Sienna 3 years ago on a dating app. How charming she'd been, how attentive. How she'd made him feel special in a way no one else ever had. He told me about the whirlwind romance, the quick engagement, the wedding that I'd paid for but barely attended because I'd had that merger deal in Boston that weekend. He told me about the first few months of marriage, how Sienna had seemed perfect, how she'd encouraged him to work harder, to aim higher, to be worthy of being my son, how that encouragement had slowly shifted into criticism, how nothing he did was ever quite good enough. He told me about Marlene, Sienna's mother, who'd started coming around more and more often, how she'd ask pointed questions about my business, about how much I was worth, about what Marcus would inherit someday, how those questions had made him uncomfortable, but Sienna had always laughed them off, said her mother was just curious, just wanted to understand their life. And then he told me about the documents, the first set that Sienna had brought home, explaining they needed to put the apartment in both their names for tax purposes. How she'd cried when he hesitated, said he didn't trust her, said his mother had poisoned him against her. How he'd signed just to stop the crying, to prove he loved her. The second set of documents, brought by Marlene, had been even easier to sign. By then, Marcus said, he was just numb to it all. Sienna had been pulling away from him, staying out late, being cold and distant. He'd thought maybe, if he just went along with whatever they wanted, she'd love him again the way she had in the beginning. I was stupid, he said, his voice breaking. I was so stupid, Mom. You weren't stupid, I said, though part of me wanted to scream that yes, he had been incredibly, dangerously stupid. You were manipulated. There's a difference. I should have known better. You warned me about her. You told me something was off. I had. On the day they'd announced their engagement, I'd taken Marcus aside and asked if he was sure, if he really knew this woman. He'd been so angry with me, accused me of never thinking anyone was good enough for him, of being unable to let him have his own life. We'd barely spoken for a month after that. What's done is done, I said. Now we focus on fixing it. How? He asked. How can you fix this? They have everything. The money's gone. The apartment's been sold to some company that probably doesn't even exist. Sienna's vanished. Her mother's vanished. There's nothing to fix. I looked at my son, at the defeat in his eyes, and felt something hard and cold settle into my chest. It was the same feeling I got when I walked into a negotiation and realized the other side thought they'd already won. Marcus, I said, I've spent 23 years building an empire in one of the most ruthless cities in the world. I've dealt with developers who tried to cheat me, contractors who tried to intimidate me, investors who tried to manipulate me. And do you know what happened to all of them? He shook his head. I destroyed them, I said simply. Not because I'm cruel, but because I'm thorough. Because when someone tries to take what's mine, I don't just fight back. I make sure they regret ever thinking they could. This is different, he protested. This is family. This is personal. Exactly, I said, which makes it so much worse for them, because now they haven't just stolen money. They've hurt my son. And I promise you, Marcus, I absolutely promise you, they will pay for what they've done. He stared at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. Maybe he was remembering who I was, what I'd built, the battles I'd won. Maybe he was starting to believe that this wasn't over. Get some sleep, I said, standing up. Tomorrow we meet with Richard and we start gathering information. We're going to find out exactly what Sienna and Marlene did, and then we're going to take it all back. Every penny, every document, everything. And if we can't? I smiled, and it wasn't a kind smile. We will. Because they made a mistake, sweetheart. They thought you were weak. They thought you wouldn't fight back. What they didn't account for was me. He went to the guest room, and I heard the door close softly. I stayed in the living room, looking out at the city that had given me everything, and started making a mental list of everyone I'd need to call, every favor I'd need to cash in, every resource I'd need to deploy. Sienna and Marlene had no idea what was coming for them, but they were about to find out. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Instead, I sat in my home office with a glass of wine I never drank and let myself remember everything I'd been trying not to think about for the past 2 years. I built my life from absolutely nothing. People forget that about me sometimes, especially the newer employees at my firm who only see the polished executive in Armani suits. They don't know that I came to this country from Poland when I was 23 years old with $300 in my pocket and a dream so naive it makes me cringe to remember it. I worked as a cleaning lady during the day. Office buildings in Midtown, the kind where businessmen in expensive suits would walk past me like I was invisible. At night, I took classes at a community college in Queens, studying business administration while eating ramen noodles for dinner because that's all I could afford. I saved every single penny, every single one. My first investment was a tiny studio apartment in Astoria that nobody else wanted because the neighborhood was rough back then. I bought it for $42,000 using money I'd saved for 3 years, plus a loan from a Polish community credit union that charged me interest rates that should have been illegal. I fixed it up myself on weekends, learned to do basic plumbing and painting from YouTube videos, and rented it out for $600 a month. That was the beginning. One apartment became 2, then 4, then a small building. I learned to see potential where others saw problems. I learned to negotiate with men who thought a woman with an accent couldn't possibly understand complex real estate deals. I learned to smile sweetly while I systematically outmaneuvered them. By the time I was 35, I owned 12 properties across Queens and Brooklyn. By 40, I'd moved into commercial real estate and started my consulting firm. Now, at 57, I'm worth somewhere around $8 million. And my firm handles some of the biggest commercial property deals in Manhattan. I met Richard Westwood when I was 31. He was a junior architect working on a renovation project for one of my buildings in Williamsburg. He had kind eyes and terrible jokes, and he treated me like I was the smartest person he'd ever met. We got married 6 months later, and Marcus was born a year after that. Richard died 12 years ago in a car accident on the FDR Drive. Some drunk driver crossed 3 lanes and hit him head-on. He was 43 years old. Marcus was 20, home from college for the summer. I remember the police officers at my door at 2 a.m, the way their faces looked when they told me. I remember calling Marcus and hearing him scream over the phone. After Richard died, I threw myself into work even harder than before. It was the only thing that made sense, the only thing I could control. Numbers didn't betray you. Contracts didn't die on you. Buildings didn't leave you alone at 55 years old, wondering what the hell you were supposed to do with the rest of your life. Marcus took it differently. He withdrew, dropped out of college after 2 semesters, said he couldn't focus. I tried to be understanding, but honestly, I didn't know how to help him. I dealt with my grief by working 80-hour weeks. I thought maybe he needed to find his own way to cope. Instead, he drifted. He'd work for a few months, then quit. He'd start projects and never finish them. He had potential. I could see it. But he couldn't seem to find any direction. And maybe that was my fault. Maybe I'd been so busy showing him what success looked like that I forgot to teach him how to build it himself. When he was 28, I used some connections to get him a management position at a Best Buy in Chelsea. It wasn't much, but it was steady income and decent benefits. He seemed grateful, but I also saw the shame in his eyes. He knew he hadn't earned it on his own merit. That knowledge ate at him, I think, made him feel even more inadequate. He met Sienna 3 years ago. He was 29, still working at Best Buy, still living in a small rental in Brooklyn that I helped him pay for. He showed me her picture on his phone one Sunday when he came over for dinner. One of our increasingly rare dinners where we'd sit across from each other and struggle to find things to talk about. "This is Sienna," he said, and his whole face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since before his father died. We met on Hinge. "Mom, she's amazing. She's smart and funny, and she actually listens when I talk. Like, really listens." I looked at the picture. She was pretty in that carefully constructed way that takes hours of preparation but looks effortless. Long blonde hair, perfect makeup, bright white smile. She was wearing a designer dress that I recognized from a boutique on Fifth Avenue, the kind that costs $2,000. "What does she do?" I asked. "She's an influencer," Marcus said. She has like 47,000 followers on Instagram. She does lifestyle content, fashion, that kind of thing. An influencer. Which meant she probably didn't have steady income. Which meant she was looking at my son and seeing not the sweet, damaged man he was, but the son of a wealthy woman. I should have said something then. I should have asked more questions, pushed harder. But Marcus looked so happy, and I'd been denying him happiness for so long by being emotionally unavailable that I couldn't bring myself to crush this one thing. I'd like to meet her, I said instead. He brought her to dinner 2 weeks later. She arrived at my apartment in a cloud of expensive perfume, kissed me on both cheeks like we were old friends, and complimented everything. My apartment, my dress, my furniture, the art on my walls. Every compliment felt calculated, like she'd researched exactly what to say. During dinner, she asked questions about my business. Lots of questions. How many properties did I own? What areas of the city was I investing in? Did I handle mostly residential or commercial? It felt like an interview, like she was assessing my worth. Marcus didn't seem to notice. He was too busy beaming at her, refilling her wine glass, laughing at her jokes. He looked at her the way his father used to look at me, with complete adoration. It broke my heart a little. After they left that night, I sat in my living room and felt deeply uneasy. Something was off about Sienna, but I couldn't put my finger on exactly what. She'd said all the right things, smiled all the right smiles. On paper, she was charming. But I've been in business long enough to recognize when someone is performing. I didn't say anything to Marcus, though. What could I say that wouldn't sound like I was being a snob? That I didn't like his girlfriend because she seemed too interested in my money? That she was too polished, too perfect, too clearly playing a role? 6 months later, they were engaged. Marcus called me at my office, breathless with excitement. "Mom, she said yes. We're getting married." I felt my stomach drop, but I forced enthusiasm into my voice. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. Congratulations." "I want to tell you in person," he said. "Can I come by this weekend, Saturday afternoon?" "Of course. I'll make dinner." When he arrived that Saturday, Sienna was with him. She had a massive diamond on her finger, at least 2 carats, and I wondered how Marcus had afforded it on his Best Buy salary. Later, I found out he'd maxed out 2 credit cards. For a ring she'd picked out herself. We sat in my living room and they told me their plans. A spring wedding, something elegant, but not too big. Maybe 100 guests. They'd been looking at venues. Sienna's mother, Marlene, was helping with the planning. "I haven't met your mother yet," I said to Sienna. "Oh, you'll love her," Sienna said, but something flickered in her eyes. "She's so excited about the wedding. She's always wanted me to marry well." Marry well, not marry someone good or kind or compatible. Marry well, as in, marry someone with money. I took Marcus aside later, when Sienna went to use the bathroom. "Are you sure about this?" I asked quietly. "You've only known her 6 months." His face hardened. "I knew you'd do this." "Do what?" "Find some reason to disapprove. You never think anyone is good enough for me." "That's not fair, Marcus. I just want to make sure you're not rushing into anything." "I love her, Mom, and she loves me. For once in my life, someone actually wants me, exactly as I am. Can't you just be happy for me?" I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell him that real love doesn't move this fast, doesn't feel this calculated. But I looked at his face, at the desperation in his eyes, and I understood. He'd been so lonely for so long. His father was gone. I was emotionally distant. He'd been drifting through life without purpose or direction. And here was this beautiful woman telling him he was special. He was enough. He was worthy of love. How could I take that away from him? "I am happy for you," I said, and hugged him. "If she makes you happy, then I'm happy." He relaxed against me. "She does, Mom. She really does." The wedding was 8 months later. I paid for most of it, of course. $60,000 for a venue in Westchester, flowers, catering, a band. Sienna's mother, Marlene, whom I met for the first time at the venue tasting, spent the entire time making comments about how generous I was being, how Marcus was so lucky to have a mother with such deep pockets. Marlene was exactly what I'd expected. Dyed red hair, too bright lipstick, clothes from discount stores that she tried to pass off as designer. She had hard eyes that tracked everything, calculated everything. When she looked at me, I saw pure resentment mixed with greed. I couldn't go to the wedding. I told myself it was because I had an important merger deal in Boston that weekend, meetings that had been scheduled for months. But the truth was, I couldn't watch my son marry that woman. I couldn't stand there and smile and pretend everything was fine when every instinct I had was screaming that this was a mistake. Marcus was hurt, I know. He called me the night before the wedding, and I could hear the disappointment in his voice. "You're really not coming?" "I'm so sorry, sweetheart. This deal is critical. I can't postpone it." "Right," he said flatly. "Of course. Business first." "That's not fair." "Isn't it, though?" He sighed. "Never mind. I'll see you when you get back." He hung up before I could respond. As a wedding present, I gave them the apartment in Tribeca. $450,000, paid in full, deed in Marcus's name only. My lawyer, Richard Chen, had insisted on that. "Don't put it in both names," he'd said. "Not until they've been married at least 5 years. Protect your investment." I should have listened to every instinct, every warning sign, every red flag. But I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was seeing threats where there were none. I told myself that maybe Sienna really did love Marcus, and I was just too cynical to recognize genuine affection. Now, sitting in my office at 3 a.m, looking at the city lights and thinking about my son sleeping in the guest room after weeks on the street, I understood the truth. I hadn't been paranoid, I'd been right, and my silence, my distance, my inability to fight for him when it mattered, had led directly to this moment. Sienna and Marlene had played me perfectly. They'd counted on my emotional distance, my reluctance to interfere, my guilt over being an absent mother. They'd known exactly how to manipulate Marcus, how to isolate him, how to make him sign away everything I'd given him. But they'd made one critical miscalculation. They thought that once they had the money and the property, they were safe. They thought Marcus would be too ashamed to come to me, too broken to fight back. They thought I'd never find out, or if I did, that I wouldn't care enough to do anything about it. They were wrong. I picked up my phone and started making a list. Richard Chen was first. Then I needed an investigator, someone who specialized in fraud and financial crimes. I knew someone, a former FBI agent who'd gone private and owed me a favor from a case 5 years ago. Then I needed to pull every record I could find on Sienna and Marlene. Bank statements, credit reports, social media, everything. By the time the sun came up, I had a plan. Not a complete plan, but the beginning of one. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Absolute certainty. This was a fight I knew how to win. This was my territory, my expertise. Sienna and Marlene had stolen from my family. Now they were going to learn what happened when you went to war with Helena Westwood. Marcus was still asleep when I left the apartment at 7:30 the next morning. I'd written him a note and left it on the kitchen counter with instructions to eat something from the fridge and stay put until I got back. I also left $300 in cash and my spare credit card, just in case he needed anything. Richard Chen's office was in a beautiful old building on Madison Avenue, the kind with marble lobbies and brass elevators that speak of old money and established power. His secretary, Patricia, smiled when she saw me come in 15 minutes early. "He's expecting you," she said. "Go right in." Richard was at his desk, already surrounded by legal pads and his laptop open to what looked like case law. He stood when I entered, came around the desk, and gave me a brief professional hug. "Helena," he said, "you look terrible." "I didn't sleep. I gathered that from your text. Sit down. Tell me everything." I did. I told him about finding Marcus outside the grocery store, about the apartment being stolen, about Sienna and Marlene, and the forged documents. Richard listened without interrupting, taking notes in his precise handwriting. When I finished, he sat back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "This is serious," he said. "If the forgery is as sophisticated as Marcus says, we're dealing with professionals. Have you seen any of the documents?" "Marcus has copies. I can get them to you today." "Good. I'll need to examine them. But Helena, I have to be honest with you. If these documents are truly flawless, if they have Marcus's genuine signature and everything appears legitimate, this is going to be very difficult to fight." "There has to be something," I said. "Some way to prove he was coerced or manipulated." "Possibly, but that's an uphill battle in court. We'd need evidence of duress, witnesses, something concrete." He paused. "However, there might be another angle. You said the apartment was sold to an international buyer?" "That's what Marcus told me. Some offshore company." Richard nodded slowly. "That's interesting. International real estate transactions have very specific requirements, especially when they involve offshore entities. Due diligence requirements, money laundering protocols, verification procedures. If they rush this sale, if they cut corners to get the money quickly, there might be irregularities we can exploit." "Like what?" "Like the transaction never being properly completed. Like the money being stuck in escrow because the buyer entity doesn't actually exist or can't pass verification. Like the deed transfer never being properly recorded." He leaned forward. "Helena, con artists get greedy. They make mistakes. If we dig deep enough, we'll find something." I felt hope stirring in my chest for the first time since I'd seen Marcus on that sidewalk. "What do you need from me?" "Everything. Every document Marcus has. Every text message, email, or communication with Sienna or her mother. Bank statements showing any unusual transactions. Phone records. I also need you to hire a private investigator. A good one." "I know someone," I said. "Thomas Brennan, former FBI, worked financial crimes. He helped me with that contractor fraud case 5 years ago." "Perfect. Get him started immediately. I want to know everything about Sienna Caldwell and Marlene Caldwell. Where they came from, who they've associated with, any prior history of fraud or financial irregularities. Bank records if he can get them. Current whereabouts, everything." "Consider it done." Richard walked me to the door. "Helena, one more thing. This is going to get ugly. Are you prepared for that? For what might come out about Marcus, about his judgment, about the marriage?" "I don't care," I said firmly. "He's my son. Nothing that comes out will change that." "Good. Because Sienna and her mother, if they realize we're coming after them, they're going to fight dirty. They'll try to make Marcus look incompetent, maybe claim he was complicit in some way. They'll try to turn this around on us." "Let them try," I said. "I've been fighting dirty for 23 years. They have no idea who they're dealing with." I left Richard's office and called Thomas Brennan from the sidewalk. He answered on the second ring. "Helena Westwood," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "It's been a while." "I need your help, Thomas. It's urgent and it's personal." "I'm listening." I gave him the condensed version. When I finished, he let out a low whistle. "Classic long con with a property flip. Yeah, I can help. Send me everything you have, names, dates, addresses, photos if you've got them. I'll start digging immediately." "How fast can you work?" "For you. I'll have preliminary findings in 48 hours, full report within a week." "Perfect. Send your invoice to Richard Chen's office. Money is not an issue." "It never is with you, Helena. That's why I like working for you." I went back to my apartment and found Marcus awake, showered, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee. He'd found the note and the money. He looked up when I came in, and there was something different in his face. Less defeated, maybe even a little hopeful. "How did it go?" he asked. "Good. Richard thinks we have options, but I need you to do something for me." "Anything." I need every document you have, every text message with Sienna or her mother, every email, every piece of communication. I need your bank statements for the past year, phone records if you can access them, everything. Marcus nodded. Most of my stuff is still in those garbage bags. Sienna threw out my laptop, but I had my phone with me. Some of the texts are still there, though she blocked me after she changed the locks. That's fine. We'll recover everything we can. Can you write down a timeline for me? Everything you remember about when the documents were signed, what Sienna and Marlene said, who else was present? Yeah, I can do that. Good. And Marcus, I need you to be completely honest with me. Is there anything at all that they could use against you? Any drugs, any gambling, any questionable financial transactions? He looked hurt. No, Mom. I'm not perfect, but I'm not a criminal. I'm not suggesting you are. But if we're going into a legal fight, I need to know every possible angle they might use. Better I hear it from you now than get surprised in court. He thought for a moment. There's nothing. I mean, I've smoked weed a few times, but nothing illegal beyond that. No gambling. The only questionable financial thing is that I was living beyond my means, using credit cards to pay for things Sienna wanted. But that's not illegal. Just stupid. I softened my tone. It's not stupid. You were being manipulated. There's a difference. We spent the next few hours going through everything. Marcus had more documentation than I'd expected, copies of the papers he'd signed, though he admitted he'd never read them carefully, text messages from Sienna about the apartment, about money, about his job. There were patterns in those messages that made me furious. Little digs about him not being successful enough, not making enough money, not being worthy of her. Emotional manipulation disguised as concern. There was one text that particularly caught my attention. It was from Sienna to Marcus, sent about 4 months ago. Your mother has so much and gives us so little. Doesn't she care about your happiness? Doesn't she want us to have a good life? Maybe if you were more assertive with her, she'd help us more. She sent messages like that all the time, Marcus said quietly. Trying to get me to ask you for money. I always refused. I told her you'd already given us enough. What did she say to that? She'd get angry. Say I was weak. Say I was too afraid of you to stand up for us. He laughed bitterly. I guess she decided to just take what she wanted instead of waiting for me to ask for it. I photographed every document, every text message, every piece of evidence. Then I sent everything to both Richard and Thomas. By early afternoon, Thomas called back. I've got something already, he said. Marlene Caldwell. She's got a sealed record from 1998. Fraud charges in New Jersey, case was dismissed on a technicality, but the arrest is still in the system. What kind of fraud? Check fraud and identity theft. She was working with a boyfriend at the time who was running a document forgery operation. They were creating fake IDs, fake checks, fake employment records. The boyfriend got caught, but Marlene cut a deal and testified against him. Her record was sealed as part of the agreement. So she has experience with forgery. Extensive experience. And Helena, there's more. I pulled her credit report. She's got judgments against her from 3 different creditors totaling over $40,000. She filed for bankruptcy in 2019. She's drowning in debt. What about Sienna? Still working on her, but I've found some interesting social media activity. She's had multiple relationships over the past 10 years, all with men from wealthy families. Each relationship ends after 6 to 12 months, and each time she seems to come away with expensive gifts or financial settlements. Nothing provable, but the pattern is clear. She's done this before. Looks like it. I'm trying to track down some of her exes, see if any of them will talk. But Helena, the really interesting thing is what I found about the apartment sale. I leaned forward. Tell me. The buyer is listed as Meridian Holdings LLC, registered in the Cayman Islands. I did some digging. The company exists on paper, but it's a shell. No real business activity, no actual assets. It was created 6 weeks before the sale of your son's apartment. A fake company. Exactly. And here's the thing. For an international buyer to purchase property in New York, especially for that amount, there are very specific due diligence requirements. Know your customer laws, anti-money laundering protocols, verification of identity for beneficial owners. This sale should have triggered multiple red flags. Why didn't it? That's what I'm trying to figure out. Either someone at the title company was incompetent, or they were paid to look the other way. But here's the good news. If the proper protocols weren't followed, the sale itself might be invalid. The title might not have legally transferred. I felt that cold, focused energy I get when I'm closing a difficult deal. What does that mean exactly? It means the apartment might still legally belong to Marcus. It means the money from the sale, which is probably sitting in an escrow account waiting for final closing requirements to be met, might never actually reach Sienna and Marlene. It means we might be able to undo this entire thing. Thomas, you're brilliant. I'm thorough. There's a difference. Give me another few days and I'll have the complete picture. But Helena, you should know, I've already found evidence that Sienna and Marlene are renting an expensive apartment in Williamsburg. 3-bedroom, waterfront building, $4,800 a month. They paid 6 months upfront in cash. They're spending the money they think they're going to get. Exactly. Which means when we pull the rug out from under them, they're going to be in serious financial trouble. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Good. After I hung up with Thomas, I called Richard and updated him on everything. He was pleased with the information about the shell company and the potentially invalid sale. This is exactly what we needed, he said. I'm going to file several motions immediately. First, to freeze any accounts associated with the sale. Second, to challenge the validity of the property transfer. Third, to open an investigation into potential fraud. I'll also be reaching out to the district attorney's office. This isn't just a civil matter anymore. This is criminal fraud. How long will this take? With the evidence we're gathering, we could have preliminary injunctions within a week, a full resolution, maybe 2 to 3 months if we move aggressively. But Helena, there's something else we need to discuss. What? We need to find Sienna and Marlene. If they realize we're coming after them, they might run. Take whatever money they can access and disappear. We need to move fast, and we need to be smart about this. Thomas is tracking them. He's got their current address. Good, but we need to be strategic. We don't want to spook them before we have everything in place legally. Can you keep Marcus from trying to confront them? I looked over at my son, who was sitting on my couch, staring at his phone with a haunted expression. I'll make sure he stays away from them. One more thing, Richard said. I think we should set a trap. What kind of trap? We let them think they've won. We have you reach out to Sienna through an intermediary. Say you want to settle this quietly. Offer them money to sign documents agreeing that the property transfer was legitimate and that Marcus has no claims. They'll think you're trying to avoid a public scandal. And when they show up to sign, we'll have everything ready. The evidence of fraud, the invalid sale, the criminal complaints. We'll have them sign documents that actually constitute a confession. And then we'll lower the boom. I thought about it. It was risky, but it was also poetic. Let them think they'd manipulated me the same way they'd manipulated Marcus. Let them walk into our trap with their greed and arrogance. Do it, I said. Set it up. The next few days were a blur of activity. Thomas worked around the clock, uncovering more and more about Sienna and Marlene. He found that Marlene had connections to a man named Viktor Petrov, a known document forger operating out of Newark. He found bank records showing suspicious cash deposits into Marlene's account in the weeks before the apartment sale. He found social media posts from Sienna showing her living a lavish lifestyle, designer clothes, expensive restaurants, all on money she didn't have. Richard filed motion after motion. He got a temporary injunction freezing the escrow account holding the sale proceeds. He got a court order preventing any further transfers of the property. He reached out to the district attorney's office and presented the evidence of fraud. An assistant DA named Jennifer Morrison took the case, and after reviewing everything, She agreed to open a criminal investigation. Marcus stayed with me during all of this. I watched him slowly come back to life. He ate regular meals. He slept in a real bed. He started going to the gym in my building, trying to regain some of the weight he'd lost. Most importantly, he started talking, really talking, about everything. About how lonely he'd been after his father died. About how inadequate he'd always felt compared to my success. About how Sienna had seemed like the answer to all of that. Someone who saw value in him that he couldn't see in himself. "I know now that she was lying," he said one evening as we sat together in my living room. "But at the time, it felt so real. She made me feel special, Mom. Like I mattered." "You do matter," I said. "You always have." I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear enough. It's not your fault. You were dealing with your own grief after Dad died. I get that now. We both just handled it badly. It was the most honest conversation we'd had in years, maybe ever. On the 6th day after I'd found Marcus, Richard called me with news. "I've got the full analysis of the documents Marcus signed. The forgery is sophisticated, but it's not perfect. There are discrepancies in the notary stamps, slight variations in the paper stock used for different pages. More importantly, the signature on the final deed transfer doesn't quite match Marcus's genuine signature. It's close, but not exact." "They forged his signature completely on the final document?" "Looks like it. Marcus probably never even saw that one. They had him sign the preliminary documents, then created the final transfer deed themselves. It's a classic bait and switch. He thought he was just updating ownership information, but they were actually setting up a complete transfer." "Can we prove it?" "Yes. I've already hired a forensic document examiner. She'll testify that the signature is forged. Combined with everything else, we have a very strong case." "When do we make our move?" "Tomorrow. I'm having my secretary reach out to Sienna through the email address Thomas found. We'll say you want to meet to discuss a settlement. Thursday afternoon at my office. I'll tell them to bring Marlene since she was involved in the transaction." "And they'll come?" "Oh, they'll come. The message will mention a $200,000 settlement offer. Their greed will override any caution they might have." That night, I barely slept again. But this time, it wasn't from anxiety or fear. It was anticipation. I kept imagining the moment when Sienna and Marlene would walk into Richard's office, thinking they'd won, thinking they'd successfully manipulated a billionaire's son and gotten away with it. I imagined the looks on their faces when they realized they'd been caught. Marcus knew what was happening. "I want to be there," he said Wednesday night. "Are you sure? I need to see her face when she realizes it's over. I need that closure." I understood. "Okay. But you let Richard and me handle everything. You don't say a word unless Richard tells you to." "I won't. I just need to be there." Thursday morning dawned cold and clear. I dressed in my best Armani suit, the navy one I wear when I need to project absolute authority. I did my makeup carefully, styled my gray hair in the elegant twist I usually reserve for board meetings. I put on my mother's pearl earrings, the ones she'd been wearing when she died, the ones I wore for luck on important days. Marcus wore one of his father's old suits that I'd had tailored to fit him. He looked good, professional, like the man he was supposed to become before Sienna derailed his life. We arrived at Richard's office at 1:30. The meeting was scheduled for 2. Richard met us in his conference room, where he had 3 other people waiting: Jennifer Morrison, the assistant DA, Officer Daniel Walsh from the NYPD Fraud Division, and Thomas Brennan. "Are they coming?" I asked. Richard checked his phone. "Sienna just texted. They're on their way. Should be here in 10 minutes. Are we recording?" "Audio and video," Jennifer Morrison said. "All legal and admissible. The moment they make any false statements or sign any documents, we have them." I sat down at the conference table and took a deep breath. Marcus sat beside me, his leg bouncing nervously. I reached over and squeezed his hand. "Ready?" I asked. "Ready," he said. At exactly 2 o'clock, Patricia buzzed the conference room. "Ms. Caldwell and her mother are here." Send them in, Richard said. The door opened and Sienna walked in first. She looked exactly as I remembered. Beautiful, polished, wearing a designer dress that probably cost $3,000. Her mother, Marlene, followed behind, also dressed expensively, trying to look sophisticated but just looking overdone. Sienna's eyes swept the room, taking in me, Marcus, Richard, and the 3 other people she didn't recognize. I saw confusion flicker across her face, then concern. "Helena," she said, and had the audacity to smile. "Thank you for agreeing to meet. I know this situation has been difficult for everyone." "Sit down," Richard said, his voice cold and professional. "Both of you." They sat. Sienna kept that smile plastered on her face, but Marlene looked nervous. She'd seen enough police stations to recognize a detective when she saw one. "Before we begin," Richard said, "I need to inform you that this meeting is being recorded for legal purposes. Do you understand?" Sienna's smile faltered slightly. "Is that really necessary? I thought we were here to reach a friendly settlement." "Do you understand that you're being recorded?" Richard repeated. "Yes," Sienna said. "Fine. Whatever." Marlene nodded, but didn't speak. Richard opened a folder on the table. "Let's talk about the apartment at 287 Franklin Street, Unit 4B, Tribeca. The property that Helena Westwood purchased for $450,000 and gifted to her son, Marcus Westwood. The property that was fraudulently transferred to Meridian Holdings LLC 6 weeks ago for $680,000. "There was nothing fraudulent about it," Sienna said quickly. "Marcus signed all the documents. He sold the apartment. It was his decision." "Really?" Richard said. He pulled out a document. "Because this is the final deed transfer, and according to 3 different forensic document examiners, Marcus's signature on this document is forged." The color drained from Sienna's face. Marlene started to stand up. "We don't have to listen to this." "Sit down, Ms. Caldwell," Officer Walsh said, and his voice had that cop authority that makes people obey instinctively. "You're not going anywhere." Marlene sat. Richard continued. "We also have evidence that Meridian Holdings LLC is a shell company created specifically for this transaction. We have evidence that you, Marlene Caldwell, have prior arrests for document forgery. We have evidence of communications between you and Viktor Petrov, a known forger currently under federal investigation." "This is ridiculous," Sienna said, but her voice was shaking now. "You can't prove any of this." I spoke for the first time. "We can prove all of it, and we will, in criminal court." Sienna turned to look at me, and for the first time, the mask slipped. I saw real fear in her eyes. Jennifer Morrison leaned forward. "I'm Assistant District Attorney Jennifer Morrison. I'm here to inform you that my office is opening a criminal investigation into fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. These are serious charges that carry significant prison time." "We want a lawyer," Marlene said suddenly. "That's your right," Jennifer said. "But before you call a lawyer, you should know that we're offering you one chance to cooperate, one chance to make this easier on yourselves." "What are you talking about?" Sienna asked. Richard slid 2 documents across the table. "These are confessions, detailed statements admitting to the fraud, the forgery, the creation of the shell company. You sign these, you agree to return all assets, and will recommend reduced charges. 18 months in minimum security, possibility of parole in 12 months. "And if we don't sign?" Sienna asked. "Then we pursue maximum charges," Jennifer said. 15 years in federal prison, no possibility of early release." The room went silent. I watched Sienna and Marlene look at each other. I saw the moment they realized they'd lost. All that planning, all that manipulation, and they'd walked right into our trap. Marlene broke first. She grabbed a pen. "I'll sign." "Mom!" Sienna hissed. "Shut up!" Marlene snapped. "We're done. It's over. I'm not spending 15 years in prison because of your stupid greed." She signed the confession with shaking hands. Sienna stared at her mother, then at the document, then at me. I met her eyes and let her see everything I felt, the fury, the contempt, the cold satisfaction of watching her perfect con collapse. She signed. The moment Sienna's pen lifted from the paper, Officer Walsh stood up and pulled out handcuffs. The sound of the metal clicking made Sienna jump. "Wait!" she said, her voice rising in panic. "You said reduced charges. You said minimum security." "And you'll get that," Jennifer Morrison said calmly, gathering the signed confessions. "After you're processed and arraigned, Officer Walsh is placing you under arrest now." "But I cooperated." Sienna's voice was shrill now, all that careful polish cracking apart. "I signed your papers." "You signed a confession to multiple felonies," Jennifer said. "Did you think you'd walk out of here free? You're being arrested, Ms. Caldwell. Both of you." Marlene stood slowly, holding out her wrists with a resigned expression. She'd clearly been through this before. Officer Walsh cuffed her first, reading her rights in that monotone voice cops use when they've done it 1,000 times. Sienna tried to back away from the table. No, this isn't happening. "Marcus!" She turned to my son, and her whole demeanor changed in an instant. Suddenly she was the loving wife again, eyes wide and pleading. "Marcus, please, tell them this is a mistake. We were married. We made decisions together. You can't let them do this to me." Marcus looked at her like he was seeing a stranger. "You threw me on the street," he said quietly. "You stole everything my mother gave me, and you threw me away like garbage. I was angry. I made a mistake. But we can fix this, baby. We can—" "Don't," Marcus said, and his voice was steady, strong. "Don't call me that. Don't pretend you ever cared about me. You used me. You saw my mother's money, and you used me to get it. That's all I ever was to you." Officer Walsh took Sienna's arm. She tried to pull away, and he was firmer. "Ma'am, put your hands behind your back, now." "This is insane," Sienna screamed as the cuffs went on. "You can't do this. I want my lawyer. I want my phone call. This is police brutality." "You'll get your phone call at the station," Walsh said. He looked at Richard. "We're done here?" "We're done," Richard said. "Thank you, officer." As Walsh led them toward the door, Marlene turned back to look at me. Her face was hard, resigned, but there was something else there too. Respect, maybe, or just the recognition of being beaten by someone better at the game. "You're good," she said to me. "I'll give you that." "I'm better than good," I said, "and you should have done your research before you went after my family." Sienna was still screaming as they led her out, her voice echoing down the hallway. Something about lawyers and lawsuits and how we'd all pay for this. Then the door closed, and there was silence. Marcus let out a breath that sounded like he'd been holding it for weeks. Maybe he had been. Jennifer Morrison packed up her files. "The arraignment will be tomorrow morning. They'll be offered bail, but given the nature of the charges and Marlene's prior record, I'm recommending they be held. Even if they make bail, their passports will be confiscated and they'll be ordered not to leave the state." "What about the apartment?" I asked. "What about the money?" Richard answered, "The sale is null and void as of the confessions they just signed. The property reverts to Marcus immediately. The money in the escrow account, all $680,000, has been frozen by court order. It'll be returned to Marcus once the legal proceedings are complete." "How long will that take?" 2 weeks, maybe 3. The confessions speed everything up considerably. They admitted to everything on record. There's no trial to prepare for, just sentencing hearings. He looked at Marcus. "You're getting your apartment back, son. And they're going to prison for what they did to you." Marcus didn't say anything. He just sat there, staring at the spot where Sienna had been sitting moments before. Thomas Brennan, who'd been quiet throughout the whole confrontation, spoke up. "There's something else you should know. When I was investigating their finances, I found something interesting. The money they've been spending, the rent on that Williamsburg apartment, the designer clothes, the fancy dinners, all of that was paid for with cash advances from credit cards. They were living on borrowed money, expecting the big payday from selling your apartment." "How much debt are they in?" I asked. Between them? About $70,000 in credit card debt, plus the rent they prepaid. When the escrow money gets returned to Marcus and they go to prison, they'll have nothing. Less than nothing. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt vindicated, and part of me did. But mostly, I just felt tired. Tired and sad that my son had been hurt so badly by people who were supposed to love him. After everyone else left, it was just me, Marcus, and Richard in the conference room. Richard poured 3 glasses of scotch from the bottle he keeps in his office for special occasions. "To justice," he said, raising his glass. I raised mine but didn't drink. Marcus held his glass and stared into it like it might have answers. "How do you feel?" I asked him. He was quiet for a long time. "I don't know," he finally said. "I thought I'd feel happy or relieved or something, but I just feel empty." "That's normal," Richard said gently. "You've been through a trauma. Seeing them arrested doesn't erase what they did to you. It's going to take time to process all of this." "I loved her," Marcus said, and his voice cracked. "I really, truly loved her. And it was all a lie from the very beginning. Every smile, every kiss, every time she said she loved me. All of it was just her playing a part, getting me ready for the con." I moved my chair closer to his and put my arm around his shoulders. He leaned into me the way he used to when he was a little boy and had nightmares. "The fact that it was a lie doesn't mean your feelings weren't real," I said. "You loved who you thought she was. That's not your fault. That's not a weakness. That's just what it means to be human, to be open to love. She's the one who's broken, not you." "Your mother's right," Richard said. "Sienna and Marlene are predators. They're good at what they do because they've practiced. They've done this before, probably multiple times. You weren't stupid or weak. You were targeted by professionals." Marcus wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. "I just keep thinking about all the signs I missed, all the times she pushed me to ask you for money, or manipulated me into feeling bad about not being successful enough. I saw it happening and I still didn't stop it." "Because you wanted to believe the best in her," I said. "Because you wanted to believe that someone could love you unconditionally. There's nothing wrong with wanting that. Everyone wants that." "Even you?" he asked, looking at me. "Even me," I admitted. "Your father loved me like that. After he died, I shut that part of myself down because it hurt too much to want something I couldn't have. I threw myself into work because buildings and contracts don't leave you. But that wasn't fair to you. You needed a mother who was emotionally present, and I gave you a mother who was just physically there." "You're here now," Marcus said quietly. "I am, and I'm not going anywhere." Richard cleared his throat. "I hate to interrupt this moment, but there's some practical business we need to discuss. Marcus, you'll need to go back to the apartment in the next few days to assess what needs to be done. Sienna and Marlene have been living there for several weeks. There might be damage, things that need to be cleaned or repaired." "I don't want to go back there," Marcus said immediately. "I can't. Not after everything." "You don't have to keep it," I said. "We can sell it if you want. Use the money to start fresh somewhere else." He thought about that. Yeah, I think I want to sell it. I don't want anything that has her fingerprints on it." "Then that's what we'll do," I said. "We'll get it cleaned out, repaired if necessary, and put it on the market. With the way Tribeca properties are moving, we'll probably get $800,000 for it now." "I don't care about the money," Marcus said. "I just want it gone." Richard made notes on his legal pad. "I'll handle the sale. We can probably have everything finalized within 2 months." He looked at me. "Helena, there's one more thing. The district attorney's office wants victim impact statements for the sentencing hearing. Both of you might be asked to testify about how this affected you." "When?" I asked. "Probably 6 to 8 weeks from now. The sentencing hearing usually happens about a month after the guilty plea is entered." I looked at Marcus. "Do you think you can do that? Stand up in court and tell them what they did to you?" He took a deep breath. "I think I need to. I need to look at her one more time and let her know that she didn't destroy me, that I survived what she did. Then we'll do it together, I said. Richard gathered his papers. I'll be in touch as things progress. Marcus, try to get some rest. You've been through hell, but it's over now. You won. They lost. After Richard left, Marcus and I sat in the conference room for a few more minutes, neither of us quite ready to leave. The late afternoon sun was streaming through the windows, making patterns on the mahogany table. Mom? Marcus said. Yes? Thank you. For believing me. For fighting for me. For not giving up even when I'd given up on myself. I squeezed his hand. That's what family does. That's what love does. And I'm sorry it took something this terrible for me to show you that. We're going to be okay, aren't we? He asked. And he sounded like a little boy again, needing reassurance. We're going to be better than okay, I promised. We're going to be better than we've ever been. And for the first time since I'd seen him sitting outside that grocery store, I believed it. The worst was over. Now came the hard part, healing. But we'd do it together. Finally, after 12 years of being emotionally absent, I was going to be the mother my son needed. Not just financially, but emotionally, completely. It was time to rebuild. And this time, we'd build something stronger. The next 6 weeks passed in a strange blur of legal proceedings and emotional upheaval. Sienna and Marlene were arraigned the day after their arrest. Sienna's bail was set at $100,000, which she couldn't make. Marlene's was denied entirely due to her prior record and flight risk. They both stayed in custody at Rikers Island, waiting for their sentencing hearing. Marcus moved back into my apartment temporarily. We settled into an unexpected routine. I'd make coffee in the mornings, and we'd sit at the kitchen table and actually talk. Real conversations about real things. He told me about his childhood, about memories of his father that I'd forgotten or never known. He told me about how lonely he'd been in the years after Richard died, how he'd felt invisible in his own life. I told him things too. About how scared I'd been when I first came to America. How many nights I'd cried myself to sleep in that tiny studio apartment in Astoria, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake leaving Poland. About how after his father died, I'd been so terrified of feeling that kind of pain again that I'd just shut down emotionally. About how I'd convinced myself that providing for him financially was the same as loving him because it was easier than being vulnerable. I think I understand now, he said one morning, about 3 weeks after the arrests. Why you are the way you are. You built walls to protect yourself. And they ended up keeping you out too, I said. That wasn't fair to you. We both made mistakes, Mom. I could have tried harder to connect with you too. I could have been honest about how I was feeling instead of just drifting and expecting you to notice. It was the most mature thing I'd heard him say in years, maybe ever. The apartment in Tribeca was another issue entirely. Richard arranged for us to do a walkthrough with a cleaning crew. I insisted on going with Marcus, even though he said he could handle it alone. The place was worse than I'd expected. Sienna and Marlene had trashed it in the short time they'd been there. Holes in the walls, stains on the carpet, the expensive kitchen countertops scratched and burned. They'd ripped out the custom lighting fixtures I'd had installed, probably planning to sell them. The master bedroom had clothes and trash scattered everywhere, like they'd left in a hurry. Marcus stood in the middle of the living room and looked around with this expression of profound sadness. She destroyed it, he said quietly. She destroyed everything. No, I said firmly. She destroyed things, objects, wood and plaster and fabric. But she didn't destroy you. You're still here, still standing. That's what matters. It's going to cost thousands to fix all this, he said. So we spend thousands. Money I have. What I don't have is another son. I put my hand on his shoulder. We'll fix it, sell it, and you'll never have to think about this place again. The repairs took 2 weeks and cost $43,000. But when they were done, the apartment looked better than it had when I'd first bought it. Marcus went back for the final walk-through alone this time. He called me from there. "It's beautiful," he said, and I could hear something in his voice, not sadness anymore, but closure. "You did a good job, Mom. Thank you for making it right." "You're welcome, sweetheart." We listed it the next day for $820,000. It sold in 4 days for $850,000. The buyers were a young couple from Seattle, tech money, excited about their first New York apartment. They reminded me of myself at that age, full of hope and ambition. I hoped their story turned out better than Marcus's had. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for a Thursday morning in late December, exactly 7 weeks after Sienna and Marlene's arrest. Richard had prepared both Marcus and me for what to expect. We'd be giving victim impact statements, telling the judge how their crimes had affected us. Then Sienna and Marlene would have a chance to speak, though Richard doubted they'd say anything meaningful. Finally, the judge would hand down sentences based on the plea agreement. The night before the hearing, Marcus couldn't sleep. I heard him pacing in the guest room at 2 a.m. I got up and found him standing at the window, looking out at the city. "Talk to me," I said. He didn't turn around. "I keep thinking about what I'm going to say tomorrow, in court. I've written it down and rewritten it a dozen times, and nothing feels right." "What do you want to say?" "The truth, that she broke something in me. That for weeks after she kicked me out, I didn't eat because I felt like I didn't deserve food. That I stood on subway platforms and thought about just stepping forward when the train came." His voice cracked. "That I lost myself completely, and I'm still trying to find my way back." I felt my chest tighten. "Marcus!" "But I also want to say that I survived, that I'm here, that she tried to destroy me and she failed." He turned to face me finally. "Is that stupid? Is it stupid to stand up there and basically admit that I almost gave up?" "It's not stupid," I said. "It's honest, and it's brave. The judge needs to understand the full impact of what they did, not just the financial theft, but the emotional destruction." "What are you going to say?" "I don't know yet. I've been trying to put it into words, but every time I start writing, I just get angry. And I don't want to stand up there and just be angry. I want to be clear, powerful. I want them to understand that they didn't just steal from my son. They stole time I can never get back, trust that took years to build." Marcus came over and hugged me. "We'll get through it together." "Yes," I said. "We will." The courthouse was in Lower Manhattan, an imposing building with marble columns and security checkpoints. We arrived early, at 8:30 for a 9 o'clock hearing. Richard met us outside, looking professional and calm in his charcoal suit. "Ready?" he asked. "As ready as we'll ever be," I said. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal. There were about 20 other people there, court staff, a few reporters, some people I didn't recognize. Jennifer Morrison, the ADA, was at the prosecution table organizing her files. At exactly 9 o'clock, a bailiff brought in Sienna and Marlene. They were wearing orange jumpsuits and handcuffs. Sienna looked terrible. Her hair was unwashed and pulled back, her face pale and drawn. The polished, beautiful woman who'd walked into Richard's office 7 weeks ago was gone. This was someone broken and defeated. Marlene looked better, oddly, like she'd accepted her fate and made peace with it. She scanned the courtroom and her eyes landed on me. She gave me the smallest nod, almost respectful. I didn't acknowledge it. The judge entered and we all stood. Judge Patricia Hammond was in her early 60s, with short gray hair and sharp eyes behind rimless glasses. She had a reputation for being fair, but tough. Richard had said she didn't tolerate nonsense and had no patience for people who preyed on others. "Be seated," Judge Hammond said. She looked down at her papers. "We're here today for the sentencing of Sienna Marie Caldwell and Marlene Ann Caldwell, who have entered guilty pleas to charges of fraud, forgery, and grand larceny. Before I impose sentences, I'm going to hear victim impact statements." She looked up. "Mr. Westwood, you may approach." Marcus stood. I watched him walk to the podium in front of the judge's bench. He had papers in his hand, but when he got there, he set them down and didn't look at them. "Your Honor," he began, and his voice was steady, stronger than I'd expected. "My name is Marcus Westwood. 7 months ago, I thought I was happily married. I thought I had a wife who loved me and a life we were building together. I was wrong about all of it." He looked directly at Sienna. She couldn't meet his eyes. Sienna Caldwell targeted me deliberately. She researched my family, found out my mother was wealthy, and decided I would be her path to that money. Every moment of our relationship was calculated. Every smile, every touch, every time she said she loved me, it was all manipulation, all strategy. And I believed it because I wanted to believe it, because I'd spent years feeling invisible and inadequate. And she made me feel seen. His voice started to shake, but he kept going. When she and her mother stole the apartment my mother gave me, they didn't just take property. They took my sense of self. They took my ability to trust. For 3 weeks, I lived on the streets of New York City. I begged for money outside grocery stores. I slept in subway stations and shelters. I went days without eating. And the worst part wasn't the hunger or the cold or the fear. The worst part was the shame, the feeling that I deserved it somehow, that I was so worthless that even the woman I loved saw me as nothing but a means to an end. I saw tears running down his face, but his voice stayed strong. I thought about killing myself. Multiple times. I stood on subway platforms and calculated how easy it would be to just step forward. The only thing that stopped me was thinking about my mother, about what it would do to her to lose me the same way she lost my father. He paused. And then she found me. She saved me, not just financially but emotionally. She reminded me that I'm worth more than what Sienna made me believe. He looked at the judge now. "Your Honor, I'm not asking for the maximum sentence out of revenge. I'm asking for it because Sienna and Marlene Caldwell are predators. They've done this before, and if given the chance, they'll do it again. They need to be stopped. And people like me, people who've been victimized by their cons, need to know that the system will protect us, that there are consequences for destroying someone's life for money." He gathered his papers and walked back to his seat. I reached for his hand and squeezed it. He'd been magnificent. Judge Hammond made notes, then looked up. "Ms. Westwood, you may approach." I stood and walked to the podium. I'd prepared a statement, practiced it several times, but standing there, looking at Sienna and Marlene, I realized I didn't need my prepared words. I needed the truth. "Your Honor, my name is Helena Westwood. I came to this country 34 years ago with nothing. I built a successful business through hard work, intelligence, and integrity. When my son got married, I gave him and his new wife a $450,000 apartment as a wedding gift. I did this because I loved him and wanted him to have security." I looked at Sienna. "I knew from the first time I met you that something was wrong. I saw through your act. I saw the way you calculated every word, every gesture. I saw how you looked at my possessions, my lifestyle, with hunger in your eyes. And I said nothing. I kept quiet because my son loved you, and I'd already failed him so many times that I couldn't bear to fail him again by being the mother who ruined his happiness." My voice got harder. "That was my mistake. I should have warned him more forcefully. I should have investigated you before the wedding. I should have protected him better. But you exploited his vulnerability. You saw a kind man who'd been hurt by life, and you decided to hurt him more, to use him for your own greed. You targeted him specifically because of me, because of my money. You married him as part of a con." I turned to Marlene. "And you taught your daughter that this was acceptable, that using people was a valid strategy, that stealing and lying and destroying lives was just business. You brought your experience with fraud and forgery to this scheme. You were the professional, training your daughter to be a predator like yourself." Back to the judge. "Your Honor, my son will recover from this. He's strong, stronger than he knows. We'll rebuild our relationship, and he'll go on to have a good life. But the damage they did isn't measured just in dollars or even in the trauma Marcus experienced. It's measured in broken trust, in time lost, in the knowledge that there are people in this world who will look at vulnerability and see opportunity for exploitation. I felt my voice getting emotional and I stopped, took a breath. I'm a businesswoman. I believe in fair dealing, in honest negotiation, in keeping your word. Sienna and Marlene Caldwell represent everything I've spent my life standing against. They're parasites who produce nothing and take everything. They deserve the full weight of the law, not as punishment, but as protection for their next victims. Because there will be next victims if they're not stopped here. I walked back to my seat. Marcus was crying quietly. I put my arm around him. Judge Hammond looked at Sienna and Marlene. Do either of the defendants wish to make a statement before I impose sentence? Marlene stood. Your Honor, I just want to say I'm sorry. I made terrible choices, and I take full responsibility. I taught my daughter the wrong things, and that's on me. It sounded genuine, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just another performance. The judge looked at Sienna. Ms. Caldwell? Sienna stood slowly. For a moment, I thought she was going to apologize, maybe even show some real remorse. But then she opened her mouth and proved me wrong. I'm not sorry, she said, and her voice was bitter. Marcus was pathetic. He handed me everything on a silver platter because he was desperate for someone to love him. His mother was an emotionally absent workaholic who cared more about money than her own son. All I did was take what was offered. If he was stupid enough to sign papers without reading them, that's on him. The courtroom went silent. Even Marlene looked shocked. And you, Sienna turned to look at me. You act so high and mighty, but you're just as bad as me. You threw money at your problems instead of actually being a mother. You gave him an apartment instead of giving him love. So don't stand there and judge me when you're the reason he was vulnerable in the first place. Judge Hammond's face went cold. Ms. Caldwell, I suggest you sit down and stop talking. Why? What else can you do to me? I'm already going to prison. Might as well tell the truth for once. Sienna laughed, but it was an ugly sound. This whole thing is a joke. Rich people protecting their money while the rest of us struggle. Well, I'm not sorry I tried to get mine. I'm only sorry I got caught. Sit down now, the judge said, and there was steel in her voice. Sienna sat, still glaring at us. Judge Hammond looked at her papers for a long moment. Then she looked up. I've been a judge for 18 years. In that time, I've seen a lot of defendants come through this courtroom. Most of them show some remorse, some understanding of the harm they've caused. But every once in a while, I see someone like you, Miss Caldwell, someone who's genuinely pleased with themselves for causing pain. She leaned forward. You and your mother orchestrated a sophisticated fraud scheme. You targeted a vulnerable person, manipulated him emotionally, forged legal documents, and stole hundreds of thousands of dollars. Those facts alone would warrant significant prison time. But your complete lack of remorse, your victim blaming, and your clear intent to continue this behavior convince me that the minimum sentence would be inadequate. My heart started beating faster. The plea agreement called for 18 months with possibility of parole in 12. I'm rejecting that agreement. Marlene Caldwell, you are sentenced to 3 years in state prison, no possibility of parole before serving 2 years. Sienna Caldwell, you are sentenced to 5 years in state prison, no possibility of parole before serving 3.5 years. Sienna's face went white. You can't do that. We had a deal. I can, and I did, Judge Hammond said. The agreement was conditional on cooperation and remorse. You've shown neither. These sentences are within my discretion, and they are final. Sienna started screaming. This is bullshit. This is because they have money. If I was rich, you'd let me walk. The bailiffs moved forward to restrain her. Marlene just sat there, looking defeated. Furthermore, the judge continued, You are both ordered to pay full restitution for all costs incurred by the victims, including legal fees, investigation costs, and property repairs. That amount, as calculated by the state, comes to $178,000. You will also be prohibited from profiting from this crime in any way, including through book deals, interviews, or media appearances. The bailiff started leading Sienna out. She was still screaming, fighting against them. Marlene went quietly, but she looked back at Marcus one time. I couldn't read the expression on her face. When they were gone, the courtroom slowly emptied. Richard came over to us. "Well," he said. "That went better than expected." Marcus let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She really didn't apologize. Even at the end, she couldn't just apologize. "Some people are incapable of it," Richard said. "They're fundamentally broken in a way that makes genuine remorse impossible. Be grateful you found out who she was before you wasted more years on her." Jennifer Morrison approached us. "I wanted to tell you both. Your statements were powerful. They made a real difference in the judge's decision to exceed the plea agreement terms." "Thank you," I said, "for everything you did on this case. Just doing my job, but I'm glad we got justice for you." She shook hands with all of us and left. We walked out of the courthouse into bright December sunlight. The city was decorated for Christmas, lights strung between buildings, wreaths on doors. Everything looked beautiful and normal, like the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. "It's really over," Marcus said, standing on the courthouse steps. "It's really over," I confirmed. "I don't know how to feel." "You don't have to know yet," I said. "Give yourself time." Richard said goodbye and headed back to his office. Marcus and I walked slowly toward the subway station. We didn't talk, just walked together in comfortable silence. Finally, Marcus said, "Mom?" "Yes?" "I think I want to go back to school, finish my degree, maybe study something different this time, something I actually care about." I stopped walking and looked at him. "What would you want to study?" "Maybe social work or counseling, something where I could help people who've been through what I went through." He looked embarrassed. "Is that stupid?" "That's the opposite of stupid," I said. "That's taking your pain and turning it into purpose. I think it's brilliant." "You'd support that, even though it doesn't pay much?" "Marcus, I don't care if you become a billionaire or a social worker or a poet. I just want you to be happy, genuinely, truly happy. And if helping others will do that for you, then that's what you should do." He smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd seen from him in months. "Okay then, I'll start looking at programs after the new year." We continued walking, and I felt something settle in my chest. Peace, maybe. Or just the knowledge that we'd survived the worst and come out stronger. My son was going to be okay. We were going to be okay. The nightmare was finally over. Now we could start living again. 6 months later, I stood in the doorway of Marcus's new apartment in Brooklyn and watched him arrange books on a shelf. It was a modest one-bedroom in Park Slope, nothing fancy, but it was his. He'd paid for it himself with money from the sale of the Tribeca apartment, after insisting he wanted to handle it on his own terms this time. "What do you think?" he asked, stepping back to look at his handiwork. "I think it looks like home," I said honestly. He'd enrolled in a master's program in social work at Columbia, starting in the fall. In the meantime, he was working part-time at a nonprofit that helped homeless youth, using his own experience on the streets to connect with kids who'd been thrown away by their families. He came home exhausted every night, but there was light in his eyes that I hadn't seen in years, maybe ever. "Coffee?" he offered. "Please." We sat at his small kitchen table, the kind you buy from IKEA and assemble yourself. He'd done it alone, hadn't asked for my help. That independence was new, hard-won, and I was proud of him for it. "I got a letter yesterday," he said, pulling an envelope from his pocket. "From Marlene." I felt myself tense. What did it say? She apologized. actually apologized, not like Sienna's performance in court. She said she'd spent 6 months thinking about what she'd done, and she wanted me to know that I didn't deserve any of it. That she'd let her own bitterness and financial desperation turn her into someone she didn't recognize anymore. He set the letter on the table. She said she hopes someday I can forgive her, but she understands if I can't. How do you feel about that? He thought for a moment. I don't know if I forgive her, but I don't hate her anymore either. She's just a sad, broken person who made terrible choices. Hating her won't change what happened, and it won't make me feel better. That's very mature of you. I've been in therapy twice a week for 6 months. I'm learning a lot about processing emotions in healthy ways. He smiled slightly. Dr. Richardson would be proud of that answer. I'd been going to therapy too, though I hadn't told Marcus until a few weeks ago. My therapist, Dr. Elizabeth Chen, was helping me understand how my own childhood trauma and my husband's death had led me to build those emotional walls. How I'd confused financial provision with love, action with presence. It was hard work, facing those truths about myself, but it was necessary. Have you heard anything about Sienna? Marcus asked. Richard told me she's not adjusting well to prison. Multiple disciplinary infractions, fighting with other inmates, refusing to participate in programs. Marlene, on the other hand, is apparently a model prisoner, teaching other inmates to read, working in the library, attending every rehabilitation program available. That tracks, Marcus said. Marlene was always the smarter of the two. Sienna just had the looks and the charm. We sat in silence for a moment, drinking our coffee. Through his window, I could see families walking by, kids playing in the small park across the street. Normal life, continuing on. Mom, Marcus said, I want to tell you something. Okay. I've started seeing someone. Nothing serious yet, just a few dates. But she's nice. Really nice. Her name is Claire. She's a teacher at a public school in Queens. We met at a community service event. My first instinct was fear, protectiveness, the urge to investigate this woman, make sure she wasn't another Sienna. But I pushed that down. Tell me about her, I said instead. His face lit up. She's funny and kind, and she doesn't care that I'm not rich or successful. She actually likes that I'm going back to school, says it shows character. She volunteers at an animal shelter on weekends. She makes terrible jokes that somehow still make me laugh. He paused. I'm taking it really slow this time, being careful. But Mom, I think she might be real. Then I'm happy for you, I said. And when you're ready, I'd like to meet her. Properly this time. Not as an interrogation, just as your mother who wants to know the people who are important to you. Really? Really, I'm learning to trust your judgment. You're not the same person you were a year ago. You've grown, you've learned. I need to respect that. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you. That means a lot. My phone buzzed. A text from Patricia Morrison, my best friend who I'd been neglecting for months during all the legal drama. She was inviting me to a gallery opening next week, her new exhibition of contemporary sculpture. I should go, I said, standing. I have a meeting at 4. Still working all the time? Marcus asked, but there was no judgment in his voice, just curiosity. Actually, I'm cutting back. I promoted Jennifer to senior partner last month. She's handling most of the day-to-day operations now. I'm stepping into more of an advisory role. Mom, that's huge. Are you okay with that? I'm more than okay with it. I spent 34 years building that company. It's time to let someone else run it while I figure out what else I want to do with my life. Like what? I'm not sure yet. Maybe travel, maybe volunteer work, maybe just spend more time with my son. I smiled. I have options now. That's the benefit of financial security. You can choose what matters. I hugged him goodbye at the door. He held on a little longer than necessary, and I let him. We were both learning to be more affectionate, to express emotions instead of just implying them. Walking back to my car, I thought about everything that had happened in the past 7 months. Finding Marcus on that street, the investigation, the arrests, the trial, the sentencing. It had been the worst and somehow also the best thing that could have happened to us. Worst because of the pain and trauma Marcus had endured. Best because it had forced both of us to confront truths we'd been avoiding for years. I'd learned that money couldn't fix everything. That success in business didn't equal success as a parent. That being vulnerable wasn't weakness, it was strength. That love required more than just providing, it required presence. Marcus had learned that his worth wasn't determined by his accomplishments or by whether someone else loved him. That trusting people was still worthwhile, even if sometimes that trust was betrayed. That surviving trauma didn't make you broken, it made you resilient. We were both different people now. Better people, I hoped. My phone rang as I was driving. Richard. Helena, I wanted to let you know the restitution payment started coming through. Marlene's been making regular payments from her prison work earnings. It'll take her years to pay off what she owes, but she's trying. What about Sienna? She's refused to make any payments, claims she has no assets and no intention of cooperating. We'll probably never see a penny from her. I don't care about the money, I said. I just wanted them to face consequences. Mission accomplished. Indeed. How's Marcus doing? Good. Really good, actually. He's thriving. I'm glad. He's a good kid, Helena. You raised him well. I raised him adequately, I corrected. He made himself into a good man despite my parenting, not because of it. Richard laughed. You're too hard on yourself, but that's nothing new. After we hung up, I drove home through the city I'd called home for 34 years. Manhattan in summer was hot and crowded and smelly, but it was also vibrant and alive and full of possibility. I'd arrived here with nothing and built everything. I'd lost my husband, nearly lost my son, and found both of us again in different ways. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through the boxes in my closet, the ones with Richard's things that I'd saved. His favorite sweater, the watch I'd given him for our 5th anniversary, photos from our wedding, letters he'd written me when we were dating. I sat on my bedroom floor and let myself remember him fully for the first time since he died. Not just the loss, but the love. The way he'd make me laugh after 14-hour workdays. How he'd believed in me when I barely believed in myself. The way he'd looked at Marcus with such pure love and pride. I wish you could see him now, I said to the empty room. He's going to be okay, Richard. We're both going to be okay. I didn't cry. I'd done enough crying over the past months. Instead, I felt grateful. For the years I'd had with Richard, for the second chance I'd gotten with Marcus, for the hard lessons that had made me a better person. The next morning, I called Marcus and asked if he wanted to have dinner that weekend. Not at a restaurant, but at my apartment. I'd cook, something I rarely did anymore. Are you feeling okay? He joked. I'm feeling perfect. Just say yes. Yes. Can I bring Claire? I hesitated for only a second. I'd love to meet her. Thank you, Mom. Thank you for giving me another chance to be the mother you deserved all along. That Saturday, I cooked Polish food, recipes from my childhood that I hadn't made in decades. Pierogi and bigos and a poppy seed cake that took hours to prepare. The apartment smelled like my mother's kitchen used to smell, and I felt connected to a past I'd tried to forget when I was building my American success story. Marcus arrived with Claire, a petite woman with dark curly hair and warm brown eyes. She brought flowers and smiled genuinely and didn't seem intimidated by my expensive apartment or designer furniture. We talked about teaching and social work and Brooklyn neighborhoods. She was easy to talk to, comfortable in her own skin, confident without being arrogant. I watched Marcus with her and saw the difference immediately. This was what real love looked like. The easy laughter, the casual touches, the way they listened to each other. Not performance, not calculation. Just two people who genuinely enjoyed being together. After dinner, Claire insisted on helping with dishes despite my protests. In the kitchen, she said quietly, "Marcus told me what happened. With his ex-wife. I want you to know, I understand if you're cautious about me. If you need time to trust that I'm not like her." "Thank you for understanding that," I said. "But I'm learning to trust Marcus's judgment. And more importantly, I'm learning that I can't protect him from everything. He's an adult. He gets to make his own choices, even if some of them might be mistakes." "For what it's worth," Claire said, "I think he's pretty amazing. What he went through would have destroyed a lot of people, but he's using it to help others. That takes real strength." "Yes," I agreed. "It does." They left around 10, and I stood at my window watching the city lights, thinking about how much had changed in 7 months. I'd gone from being a woman who defined herself entirely by professional success to someone who was learning to value relationships more than achievements. It wasn't easy, undoing decades of emotional patterns, but it was worth it. My phone chimed. A text from Marcus. "Thank you for dinner and for being so welcoming to Claire. I love you, Mom." I typed back, "I love you too, sweetheart. More than I can ever express in words." 3 dots appeared, showing he was typing. Then, "You're expressing it pretty well these days. See you next week?" Absolutely. I set down my phone and smiled. We weren't perfect. We still had work to do, conversations to have, old wounds to heal. But we were trying. We were present for each other. We were building something real and lasting. Sienna and Marlene had tried to destroy us. Instead, they'd inadvertently given us the push we needed to save each other. Sometimes the worst things that happen lead to the best transformations. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what really matters. I'd started with nothing in this country and built an empire. But my greatest accomplishment wasn't the buildings or the money or the success. It was this: my son, healthy and happy and whole. Our relationship rebuilt on honesty and presence and love. That was worth more than all the apartments in Manhattan. That was everything.